Well, welcome to another edition of BizTalk Weekly. I'm your host, Greg Johnson with Focal Point Business Leadership Coaching. My guest today is Chris Hartwig. Chris is the president of Ti-Zack Concrete, a business located in Le Center, Minnesota. And Chris, I want to thank you for joining us today. And if you could kind of kick things off, just give us a brief kind of high level background of you and also of your business.
Sure. Thanks, Greg. Yeah, thanks for having me. Again, my name's Chris Hartwig. I am born and raised in Lee Center, coincidentally. I went to school in Mankato at Minnesota State for construction management, graduating in 2003, where I then worked for another local contractor, a concrete company, doing, estimating, project management, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Which brought me down the path to a couple other companies where I crossed paths with my current company, Ti-Zack Concrete. I was working for another contractor and hired Ti-Zack to do some work for me out of state during stimulus times. We were in Oklahoma, actually, doing some what some would have called sidewalks to nowhere was kind of the thing at the time when Obama had released all of this. But it was good for our business, regardless of our political views.
Right.
So it got it got us on the map where I was working somewhere else. It made sense for me to join forces with Ti-Zack at the time. Who my employer at the time was very, very gracious and knew that was a great path for me. And they actually allowed me to take some, bonded contracted work with me to Ti-Zack. At the time was very, very crucial in the aspect of, financials and, the balance sheet wasn't wonderful, but the workforce was great. So it allowed me to take that work and get us, financially stable for the next year, where I became full-time working with Ti-Zack, giving us like I said, the financial stability to bond and complete projects on our own. That was roughly 2007, with probably 19 employees.
Okay.
And we've slowly grew out of that, and divided crews, split them, added, and started multiplying forces, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
to and geographically working, in 2009, I think we worked probably in 6 states. So it's challenging, but it gave us a bigger playground, a bigger market,
Right.
to expand. So, with that being said, we from 2009 to probably 15, we multiplied into roughly 60 people.
Wow.
In terms of revenue, and it was probably 3 million, up to 30 million in that time frame. So it was
Beautiful.
it was hard. It was hard, but it was super fun.
Yeah.
Had some really, really good people around me. The work ethic is second to none, from where we all came from. So
That's awesome.
that was great. So in that time frame, I ended up buying into the business with my former partner, who has now since sold off. We actually sold the entire business 2 years ago, and I bought back in with some investors.
Okay.
So that's in 25, we just closed the books with about 92 million of revenue.
Ooh.
So it's been a growth, but a steady growth. I mean, that's over almost 20 years.
Yeah. And talk just for a minute, Chris, about what your company does.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're
Okay.
a concrete contractor. We do road work primarily. In these years I'm talking about, we did a lot of Americans with Disabilities upgrades to streets, sidewalks, curb ramps, corners, things like that. So
Yeah.
we were really on the front edge of that, when that got technical, if you will.
Right. Yeah. Do you
coming down on cities and states in different areas.
Sure.
to be in compliance.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, I see a lot of that business still, going on in cities that I'm in. So, yeah. Well, thank you. That's really helpful to hear that. When it came time for you to buy in to the business, what were your thoughts around becoming a business owner as opposed to, prior to that, you were an employee of the company. Just talk a little bit about what was going through your mind when you made that decision.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it was honestly quite scary. The timing of it was interesting, because we were, the interesting part of it, and I'm sure a lot of people go through this, is, you're building the company, you're making it worth more money, which is costing you more to buy it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that essentially happened at the end with no heartburn. It just, you build something and you work for all the right reasons, and you're costing yourself on that side of it. However, you're not topped out, and there's still room for growth, and you're doing it organically, if you will. So, I mean, scary would be the lightest way to say it, but you also know what you have. It's a known quantity.
Right.
The people are behind you. Like I said, it's all in your workforce. Your people are your biggest asset. Anyone can buy a truck. It takes a lot to have the right people.
Yeah. I take it there weren't a lot of surprises in that situation since you knew the company as well as you did. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, like I said, it was a very known quantity at the time. It was, as expected, and, I was working for those shares, not necessarily, paying for them with cash.
Yeah. Yeah. You said something there about it being scary. And I think I appreciate the fact that you said that out loud, because I think a lot of business owners feel that, but not necessarily wanting to say it. So just touch on that a little bit in terms of what, when you said it was scary, what was it that was most concerning to you? Like, what was the one thing that was crossing your mind that might have prevented you from taking this step into ownership?
Yeah, in all reality, it's the liability that goes with any business, primarily construction. The exposure is pretty grand, right? You have employees, you have your tail on the line, you have insurance, but you also have exposure to something catastrophic that digs into your own pocket, and for everything you've worked for. When you're an employee, you go home and you find another job. When you are the employer, you are done.
Yeah.
So that would have been the scariest part to me, is just the liability that comes with it, for how hard you work. It's hard to think about losing it.
Right. I think any kind of business ownership situation, there's risk involved. I think in your case, not only is there risk of owning a business, because, businesses fail all the time, right? But in your case too, like you said, construction's not for the weak of heart, right? I mean, you're getting in there and you're doing big projects, and you're dealing with large equipment, and you've got to make sure that the folks working for you, are doing things right, not only for themselves but for people around them, right? Even bystanders sometimes. So, yeah.
Well, and you think of the market, and the market strength, and that you're dependent on that the rest of your life, and you are always to some degree anyway. But when it's yours, it's a little different look.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you ever envision yourself being a business owner when you were, let's say, when you were going to college, or for first year on your first job? Did you ever envision?
I didn't. That's kind of a funny question and a funny result, just in terms of I went to college to get out of Lee Center. Plain and simple. I didn't really know exactly what I was going to do. I had a lot of exposure in several trades of different types of construction, so I was always drawn to that. But it was more of a let's go see what happens and get out of here for a minute. And I mean, I wasn't even out of college and I was back in Lee Center working and really never truly left.
Right. Right. Because the center and Mankato are pretty close to each other, right?
Right, right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. You talked about doing business, in 6 states, I think you said. Um, how do you acquire business? And again, you don't have to talk about details or things that are proprietary to the business, but just what's your process for acquiring new business?
Well, we're a bid build company. So we work primarily government, federal, state, municipalities.
Okay.
They advertise a project that, may or may not suit our needs. So we get a quick snapshot of what the project entails. We take a look at it and say, yep, that's in our wheelhouse. We'll submit a bid, and we're probably 90% of the time we would be the acting prime contractor.
You would. Okay.
Yeah, and there are times where there's just a small facet of the project that is suited for our needs, so we'll be a subcontractor at those times. And I guess from the sidewalk ADA side, we've kind of grown into light minor paving, concrete pavement repair, now actually bridge repair, some things that different facets of the industry that we can build our toolbox, if you will.
Yeah.
So as we look through those advertisements, we see opportunities, and we're basically bid build, low bid wins every time. So in those terms, that's how we find the work. In our climate in Minnesota, it becomes very, very difficult to pour concrete in January right now. Yeah. So we started expanding to looking out of state, Texas primarily was doing a lot of our type of work. So we put our name in the hat, if you will, and became successful in that market of keeping year-round work, which is good for lots of things, cash flow, keeping the wheels moving, things like that.
Yeah. I would think from an employee retention standpoint as well. I know, a lot of construction companies, like you said, they do tend to be seasonal, especially up here in the Midwest. And how do you keep good employees busy in the winter if you can't pour concrete, right?
Right.
And there's nothing worse, I'm sure you would agree, than you have good employees and either you have to let them go because the economics of the business are such that, or they go and find something else because they need to put food on the table as well.
Correct. That's right.
Talk a little bit about, you talked about this expansion into other states, into Texas. Like, I take it you were probably not, you might have been well known to the state of Minnesota, let's say, or to, other government agencies in the state. But when you went to Texas or another state, did anyone know who you were? Like how did you develop business in states where either you were, not well known or not as well known as you were in your home state?
Sure. Well, and kind of like I said, we're awarded the contract, so that goes through the higher ranks, right, through the government agency, whatever it may be, and it's handed down to the city, state, county, whatever it may be, to do the actual construction work. So they're handed a contract, and it's a Minnesota contractor. Let's just say we'll use a Texas project. They're handed that job. We have the job. We go in, we set up, and it really truly is in the humans that make the difference, right? So we have some really good Midwesterners, work ethic. Things are better, different than what, let's just say, that they were used to seeing, right?
Sure.
So as they progress and get out and start moving, it's really quite mind-blowing in southern markets how fast and hard our people work. So really the guys do the actions speak louder than words, right? I remember, and this still happens quite often, if I go to a pre-construction meeting that hasn't worked with our people, and they ask me when we're going to start and when we're going to, and I tell them, and they kind of laugh, like, yeah, right, like, good luck, and it's, that's the kind of the slippery slope of, well, I don't want to be, and I use those words a lot, like, just give me a chance, let my actions, let our people work, because it can be detrimental as well if it's overwhelming for an inspector or an agency that can't keep up, and they feel like they're, being hoodwinked just because they can't see it.
Right. Right. Well, certainly from a business standpoint, you don't want to be making commitments that you can't live up to, because I think you'd probably agree your credibility
Cut
is
out.
is really why people do business with you, right? So your ability to be able to meet those commitments, I'm sure, is critical.
Yeah, we cut out there for a second, but I missed part of that.
Oh, I'm just saying that you don't want to promise something that you can't live up to, because
Exactly.
that's going to get out there in the marketplace, right? And I think, like a lot of industries, concrete world it's a small world. I mean,
Hmm.
there's a lot of business going on, but it's a world that, people talk like any industry. So if you're
Yeah.
making commitments you can't keep, that gets around.
Yeah, you want to be as soft spoken as you can on the front end and let the actions do the work. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Thinking back, Chris, you've been in this business now for maybe about 20 years or so. When was a time where you were really, like, you really faced probably the biggest challenge that the business has faced? Like, what were the circumstances, and how did you maneuver through that situation?
Yeah, there's been a couple times that I can think of, when markets get tight, when you got a lot of mouths to feed, your people are out there doing what I just told you. And I mean, they're expecting you to keep work in front of them. And I mean, there's definitely times where you don't have a full plate in front of them. So you're really faced with, not panicking and not necessarily showing the cracks in your armor, but you have to work later, longer, harder to figure out where that next job is, how you're going to get there, and just dig deep and, make calls, call everybody in your phone book, do everything you can to keep people busy, or you expect to lose them, and, they may go somewhere worse, better, indifferent. So, there was a time where we were, very, very, very light on work, and like I said, reached out to some people, and, with, we cut margins. We had some friends that helped us. We had some, work that popped. So, those are some really, really stressful days where you just don't know where it's coming or how it's coming, but you just have to keep your head down.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that goes back to, like you said a few minutes ago, when you're the business owner, I mean, it can weigh pretty heavy on your shoulders
Yeah.
when it's not just you, but there's others counting on you as well. So it's not, again, business ownership isn't for everybody.
Right.
And I think it's interesting how you said before, you never thought about being a business owner when you were first starting out, and yet here you are running, a very successful, rather large business. That's an interesting journey that you've been on. When you look back now on being a business owner now for quite some time, what are some things that you think are, maybe a misconception from what you thought it was going to be? In other words, are there things that as a business owner you had expectations about, and now you're in it and it's like, wow, that's a lot different than what I thought it was going to be?
Yeah. I mean, I think if you started, from day one, you expect things to be easier, from just a novice level of, um, and I suppose every business is different, but I mean, I really do feel like if you're going to be successful in your business, you have to be hands-on, as much or as long as possible.
Yeah.
So I think, not really knowing or expecting to be a business owner, my answer would be a little more novice. I would have never realized all of the ins and outs, and, what you really have to go through, and how deep you have to dig at times to be that.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you. Uh, You know, you've talked a lot about sort of the business early on. Say over the last year or two, challenges that the business has faced, what are they and how have you addressed them?
Yeah. Interestingly, like I said, we've expanded. We've, reached out. We have some investors. We have some private equity, backing, if you will.
Okay.
In not necessarily traditional private equity, but a consortium of pretty like-minded humans that do know our business. So it's unique, it's interesting, and it's good. We've branched out. We've started another division with some specialty work.
Right.
We're looking at new areas. So growth in today's climate is hard. It's very, very, very hard.
Yeah.
Everything's pretty tight right now. I mean, like I said, the temperature is pretty cold on our side of things. There's not a ton of work out there. It's that time of year where you don't know what's coming and what's not. They're advertised. You bid the jobs as they come.
Right.
And then
Right.
you start making a puzzle out of that for your different crews and different disciplines. Across. I think we have active contracts right now in Missouri, Texas, North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa.
Wow. Okay.
So that's a lot of moving parts with about 130 people. Some crews are better at some things than others, or some crews only do certain things. And the traveling crews, we have crews that don't necessarily, they have young families, and they want to be home, and they need
Right.
to be home. So we try to keep a certain amount of people local, if you will, or in state, or within a couple hours. So you start adding all those things together, and trying to make every one of them crews efficient, or busy and efficient. It's very, very difficult. So it's really getting the right people on board to help facilitate that.
Are you employing people, or are you contracting with the crews? Like, are these employees of your company?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. We do both. I mean, we have some subcontractors if it's a different discipline, if it
Yeah.
was pavement markings or something like that we don't do that. Work that we don't self-perform, we would contract out. But for the most part, it's, our employees doing our work.
You talked a minute ago about taking on an investor or an investment company. And again, without going into a lot of the details and things that are sort of proprietary, but from your standpoint, the decision-making process to kind of take on an investors as opposed to just kind of going it alone. Talk a little bit about that.
I guess that some of it goes back to my previous point, where the business grew to a point where it probably wasn't economically beneficial for me to purchase the whole thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it becomes kind of a Shark Tank theory as well. When you have this consortium of humans that have resources that you don't, it becomes a little bit exciting to expand that into their knowledge base. So between those two things, it really made a lot of sense to go that route, where, versus, borrowing money at that stage of the game to try to do it again, or, collecting some money, putting some back, and gaining the wealth of the knowledge of the people that we're buying with.
Yeah. Yeah. Whether you think about it this way or not, I mean, it's all about risk, right? It's like, how much risk do you want to bear yourself versus bringing in investors who, help reduce that risk. Obviously, there's downside whenever we bring in a partner or another individual. Now we got somebody else we've got to sort of work with, but
Exactly.
Certainly in your situation, it sounds like it's been real positive, and certainly. An organization like that can bring a lot of resources to bear that would have been a challenge for you personally, or owning the business.
Absolutely.
Individually.
Yeah, I mean, we were somewhat limited with my potential. I mean, our growth was limited by what I could do and what I could pull in, and I feel like we had pretty well tapped that.
Yeah.
So to have that new, I mean, and to your point, thinking about, essentially going to work with someone or for someone it wasn't a super fun thought either after, pretty well running the business for 20 years and not, necessarily answering to a board or to anything. But that's really been pretty casual, pretty easy. Partly because of the behaviors or the personalities involved, and partly because of what we do and how we do it.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and I think that's something that a lot of business owners wrestle with at some point as they're growing their business. And it's a decision that's different for every business owner. I mean, some just would not want to work in that sort of an environment. And others are like, boy, I really want somebody to come alongside and really help grow this business and bring those resources or those skills that, I may not possess directly, right? Because I suspect you've been able to get, not only is it sort of this financial investment, but, just being able to grow your team, right? I mean, that requires.
Exactly.
Yeah. Awesome.
And that's been the fun part. Like I said, just some of the new relationships are great, and they're super, intelligent humans. It's fun.
Yeah. When you look out, you talked a little bit about some of the recent challenges, but as you look out, let's say the next few years, do you see more expansion, and is it, further geographic expansion, or how do you see the business sort of playing out here over the next few years?
Well, that's the fun thing. And, we've learned that, organic growth is very, very difficult in today's world. So by acquisition, I would say we would likely grow just to some level, as we watch the climate, as we watch the market shift. That's what we're looking at. We're looking at, where is our next opportunity? I couldn't tell you where it is, or who the next acquisition may be, but I know that our team is always looking, and quite excited to visit with people. Everyone loves to tell their story, and it becomes kind of a honeymoon, if you will, and then reality kicks in, and we go through all these processes, and it ends well again. So it's typical to anything. I'm sure every industry has the same challenges, and we've found that over it doesn't really matter what industry in it.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things you said earlier was you were talking about, the market's kind of tight right now, and you don't exactly have a business where you can like prop up the market. I mean, yes, you can bid prices differently, but it's not like you can go out and run a sale per se or try to prop up demand. I mean, you're challenged by the fact that, it's kind of like there isn't a lot you can do to influence the projects other than win them, right? Bid them as competitive as you can, but you're in a situation where, the market is kind of the market. And where some businesses have some, when you think about like retail businesses, there's things that they can do to kind of maybe sort of push demand up, even if it's just temporary. But I think it's more challenging in a situation of like you're in, where the business is out there is the business that's out there, and we can't do a lot to influence our market other than go and win projects. So
that's right. Yeah, it's very, very fixed. We geographically we can expand, but like again, that only works for part of the company.
Hey, Chris, talk a little bit about your, just like a lot of times what I talk to business owners who, really are challenged around kind of a balance between work and personal life. Are there things you do to make sure that, it doesn't become like your business doesn't become all consuming? Like how do you manage your personal, your ability to have personal time?
Yeah, and I don't have a secret recipe for that, but I think really a lot of it depends on, who that time is involved with. My wife is very, very understanding, always has been. We have 4 children that are very, highly active in
Yeah.
sports and everything else. So, I mean, I really do spend a lot of time on my schedule and planning and, really thinking ahead for all ends of it. And you just have to prioritize almost every decision of, what's the risk, what's the reward, what's the consequence, and everything is cause and effect, right? So there's times where you just have to miss a couple of games and some things in your life that you wouldn't want to, but that it's important. In the last 5 years, I've probably hired more people than I've ever, I mean, for sure than I ever have to fill some of those gaps as we grow and as we expand. You couldn't do it anyway.
Right.
But as you start putting faith in people, I mean, that's really the only secret sauce I have is good humans that can support some of that. But again, it's just that a balance. You're
Yeah.
the best you can on both ends, and you're never doing great on both ends, but you're doing what you can.
The one thing I really liked what you said there was the fact that you are proactively looking at your schedule and making decisions about it. And I think there's a lot of times where business owners let the schedule control them as opposed to you controlling your schedule. And it's not easy, but you do get to make the final call as to whether where you're going to be and where your time's going to be used. And again, that doesn't make it any easier, but at least knowing that, hey, I make the decision about where my time goes I think that's really critical and really crucial.
Well, and I think that's what helps your mindset. It's still at will.
Yeah.
There's still options. No one's forcing you to do anything. You have to do what you feel is best. And
Right.
Every decision costs money.
Yeah. Yeah. Chris, a lot of times we get folks who are contemplating either starting their own business or buying a business such as you did. Is there any piece of advice you would give somebody who called you up on the phone and said, "Hey, Chris, I'm thinking about buying a company or starting my own company," and you've been doing this for a long time and you've been very successful. What's the one or two things you might uh, give them advice on?
I mean, to that point, and I guess just kind of recapturing the last few questions of, I mean, it's really the people that you have around you and how you treat them and how they react, right? I wouldn't be anywhere without 20 people. Obviously, there's 130 there. I don't want to discredit anybody, but there's some
Right.
people who are neck out with me.
Chris, I might have lost you. No, there you are.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, no problem. No problem.
No, it's just straight up relationships. I mean, every industry is going to face it. The relationships you make and how you treat people and how they respond is 95% of my success.
Great. Great. Well, Chris, we really appreciate you coming on the show today. And I really appreciate the insights you shared. It's always enjoyable for me to hear business owners talk about their business. I can hear the passion come out as you speak about it. So, again, thank you for being on the show, and
Yes.
look forward to hearing more about Ti-Zack in the future.
Right on, wife. Thank you for having me.